Hello and welcome. My name is Father William Maestri, and this is another edition of Overfed and Undernourished. I'd like to begin with a question, if I may. Do you think that mental health is a good thing? Do you think that society overall should promote mental health for the individual as well as for families and the society at large? Now, perhaps at first blush, such a question strikes you as strange because it seems to be so obvious. Almost all of us would say, well, of course it's a good thing. The opposite what? To have mental impairment, to have mental and emotional difficulties? Well, I agree, and I was somewhat hesitant to even ask the question because the answer does seem to be so obvious. However, on closer inspection, it dawned on me that perhaps we really don't believe that mental health is a good thing. Even though in the last century or more, we've made great strides with mental health. Our understanding, our compassion and patience and support for promoting mental health. Certainly in the last several decades, we've talked about the importance of including mental health, for example, in all kind of life insurance and health insurance programs, making it part even of government programs to promote mental health, because we realize more and more as we study the brain and the mind that the brain, physical organ, plus the mind, how we process things and how our bodies function, we realize once again that we are not a kind of Platonic dualism of body here and soul there, or our psyche there. We're not a kind of Cartesian in which our body is just a machine, and the mind is kind of the central computer. I guess they had natural computers then. And it just kind of runs and processes, but the two are really kind of separate. We realize that that's not true, and that the human person is a unity. It's a oneness. Our mind and our body work together so that hopefully we can function in a state of well-being, both physically, spiritually, and of course, mentally. And so the reason I began to doubt that we really believe that mental health is a good thing is because I'm looking at the educational landscape that is present in the country today, especially in terms of the handling of this virus at the elementary level of education. I think it's one of the great tragedies that has befallen us. And I'm talking specifically about the closing of classrooms, of in-classroom learning, of children interacting in schools and so on, and to be incredibly shocked, if not incredibly just so disappointed in the educational and political establishments that have allowed this to take place. There's almost a complete silence from our so-called political leaders, from the White House on down. And there is a tremendous, I think, shame associated with teachers' unions and the ancillary unions, because they're all of one cloth: transportation, cafeteria, maintenance, and so on. Unions and school boards elected by citizens, funded by citizens, supported by citizens, have in many states gone along with this, especially in some of our biggest states. And we're told time and time again that we have to be safe, we have to follow the science. Well, if we had followed the science, and one really should stop saying that. You talk about misinformation. Well, to say that schools cannot be open because of safety is a complete falsehood. The CDC, the American Medical Association, the Association of Pediatric Physicians, and a whole host of others, including independent physicians, have indicated that among the safest environments is that of a school that's open and functioning. The population in the school is among the lowest in susceptibility for contracting the virus as well as transmitting the virus. And yet, large teachers' unions have consistently indicated that they will not return to the classroom. And in Chicago, a kind of epicenter of all of this, has indicated that they will refuse to work and take to the picket lines rather than teach. In other words, the picket line will take the place of the classroom. Evidently, it's safer on the picket line than it is teaching your children in the classroom. Now, this is really abhorrent. And the silence is a silence of shame. That's exactly what it is. Because the people that can least afford to be affected by this, children, parents, those are the ones who carry the real burden and the impact of this kind of approach and behavior by irresponsible people that are entrusted with a tremendous public good, education, but more importantly, they're entrusted with children and the welfare of children. And this shutdown, this so-called virtual learning that everyone seems to be on board with. Well, evidently the everyone are not talking to parents, are not talking to physicians, are not talking to people in science who indicate it's not the best of all possible worlds. It is impacting terribly the children that are most at risk, families who are struggling economically and financially are now burdened with all kinds of psychological and emotional pressures, not to add to the burden of finding people to care for their children while they're working maybe 1 or 2 jobs, especially in this challenging environment. What about their mental health? School districts are reporting an increase in the number of children who have either contacted centers for mental issues, of children who once never thought about suicide, who are thinking about that, thinking about hurting themselves. The number of children who have committed suicide is alarming. One child is one child too many over something that really should never have been allowed to materialize. And again, this is not only a mental health issue, it's a moral issue. It's a moral issue. We cannot allow this kind of thing to be used for some kind of political or ideological point to be made. Do we really want to sacrifice these children who, again, the most at-risk children, the children who are most in need of education and a safe environment? We hear this talk about safe environment. We want safety and safe environment, and we want all of these kinds of things. One of the safest environment is in the school. Many children depend upon school for nutrition, for counseling, for social interaction, for monitoring. It's a place where they have a chance to get that precious education so that they can indeed progress in their life chances, to have a better life for themselves. And if they get married and have children, that those children will have a better chance because they're not repeating the cycle of neglect, the cycle of low expectation, lack of education. And so it's beyond troubling. It's beyond troubling. And it seems that it's time, long past time, really, for those who are entrusted with authority and of influence to begin to speak up. It's not a time for silence. It's a time to be vocal. It's a time to speak. And it's a time for communities to come together and a nation as a whole to say enough is enough. It's time for us to open our schools and teachers to get back into the classroom and teach. this is not simply an educational issue. It is a mental health issue, it's an emotional issue, and it is a profoundly moral issue. It is something that should be at the very center of our conscience, not simply our consciousness, but our conscience when we are, quote unquote, debating this. And so it is hoped that communities will demand of those who are entrusted with these important positions of authority and of influence to really do the right thing. It's a time to really put children first. And we put children first by putting children first and putting aside all of the politics, all of the ideology, and all of the idea that somehow, which is a gross rationalization, that it's just as good if they're sitting in front of a screen as if they're in a classroom with their classmates taught by a teacher. And the idea that somehow this virtual learning is very effective. Perhaps the most shameless example was by a teacher who took pictures of herself, or worse, had someone take pictures of her in a bikini on a beach, I believe it was in the Bahamas, and taking pictures of herself. And that was a teacher because the school was indeed shut down. I guess that's called distance learning. She probably was distance learning or teaching from the beach in the Bahamas and was very proud of this. And she had so many quote-unquote hits, whatever that means, to view her and look at her. It's a wonderful experience, really. What kind of message did that teacher teach? Which kind of lesson did that teacher teach for all of her children, all of the students who saw her? You know, when you go to the classroom, when you go to a classroom, you're given the lesson and then you're given the test. In life, you're given the test and then you learn the lessons. Well, we're learning a great deal of lessons today. Let's stop all the talk. The talk is too loud, but what's even louder is behavior. Let's get back in the classroom. Let's really be pro-education, pro-child, and pro-family. Not simply in slogans and in talk, but in our action. Our children need it, and we can do no less than to meet that need.